Second bow. Third bow. We now wish to humbly invite Luang Por to give us final instructions before ending the retreat. Luang Por, over to you.
Okay. Well, I forget, I lost my notes. What's the game plan for this session?
Okay, you're supposed to give us the final instructions, Luang Por.
And how much time?
As much time as you need, then we go into the forgiveness ceremony. And then we have some of the yogis who would like to share the experiences.
Okay.
Then we ask for the refuges and the 5 precepts, photo taking, and the last one is the closing homage.
Okay.
So all that we have an hour and a half, Luang Por.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Enough time.
Great. Okay. So what to say? So this practice of awakening is suggested in different ways by different teachers. So we've been listening to Luang Por Sumedho's really inspiring Dhamma talks from Amaravati, and he's emphasizing it's like this, and all his talks go back to that same emphasis. It's like this. And then I've been playing around with that idea a lot. I use that a lot, but also who's thinking. Then you have words like witness. So there's a whole range of language which points to the same thing. Luang Por Sumedho was using consciousness itself, and then I was using presence. So hopefully you kind of get what the language is pointing to, that we as practitioners experience a world of change, emotional, physical. We have memory, we have thought coming and going, planning, thinking, analyzing. We experience strong emotions, weak emotions. The weather is beautiful or the weather is difficult. So there's that whole range of movement that we experience as human beings, and our attention has to be preoccupied with that for much of the time. We need to live in the world and survive, more than survive, thrive, take care of our families, take care of our environments, take care of our own bodies. So that whole realm of worldly dhammas is obviously very, very important. Sometimes we use the word worldly dharmas and transcendent dharmas, and as if worldly is somehow lesser. But if our worldly concerns are not well attended to, if we are heedless in that area, then the world will just be more confusing than it already is. And hence the emphasis on like really good moral living, good, honest living in whatever endeavors we are involved in. And then the emphasis on Kalyanamitta, that, you know, we come together like this and we create a kind of online Kalyanamitta. And it's great, isn't it? That here we are all with our different inner worlds and our different perspectives on life and our different cultural conditioning and our different ages. But what unites us all is a sense of aspiration to something which is bigger than just the normal experiences of happiness and unhappiness. And that aspiration needs to be encouraged all the time, because the worldly dhammas are so sometimes just so compelling or so oppressive, the worries and concerns we have, or the excitements and distractions we have. So I think the organizers of this retreat have done great service to us because we've created an environment, a sort of online monastic environment of Kalyanamitta, where we can really bring to consciousness that which is most valuable in our lives. Sure, our kids are very valuable and our relationships are valuable, but what makes them even more valuable, those close beings that we live with, is that we understand our own hearts, that we have Dhamma in our own lives. So my compliments and gratitude to the organizers of this retreat. I'm sure it's not easy. I never know, what goes on in the backgrounds. And I can see Siu Fong and Sister are looking intently at the computer there. So there's something going on. As the teacher, I just sort of walk in, say my bit and walk out. But in the background, there's lots of hard work done. And this is good work, isn't it? It's a good work of creating atmospheres, creating situations, creating sangha, if you will, where we can bring up these good values. And that's, of course, the dana of service. So in a Buddhist context, lifestyle includes both refraining from doing that which is harmful, but also instigating that which is helpful. And so service, dana, generosity in all manner of ways is also very important, because that brings a kind of social meaning to life. If meditation just becomes too much introspection, too much about my practice, it becomes very unhappy, because there's a sort of almost a greed, isn't there? Almost a dismissal of worldly dharmas. Well, they're not important. What's really important is my practice. And that kind of selfishness doesn't really work. But a life lived only in service, a life where you're only serving and only outward all the time, that's very difficult to maintain, because that can lead to burnout. So developing both a social practice of giving and social society of giving and caring, and that's what these groups are about. They really care. They really care for us, don't they? They care for society. They want to make society a better place. And when that is the attitude we bring to our social environment, that's very, very wholesome, and it develops a sense of self-surrender. How can I give myself to the social institutions that I'm involved in? How can I give myself to family relationships in a way which are helpful and skillful? All of this is not easy. It's hard work, but it's good work. What else would we want to do? And so I've seen like in monastic communities, the teachers I've had, they've worked very hard for their communities. Lopo Cha, Lopo Samedo, Ajahn Amaro, Ajahn Sachito, Ajahn Jayasaro, all these my peers, they work very, very hard for society, for the well-being of society, but also they're very, very diligent in their own understanding their own minds, as we say, in their practice. So their practice is both social and individual. And having those kinds of friendships, having that kind of kalyanamitta is the greatest treasure, isn't it? It's such a treasure to kind of be with you and practice in this way. So do look at your lifestyle and see, like, what would I recommend? Well, you shave your head and be a monk. You can't all do that. Not many people want to do that. But what is it about monasticism? Like there was a teacher called Frishof Schoen, who was a philosopher, and he said, not everyone has the vocation to be a monastic, but everyone has a bit of the monastic in their own heart. And I think that the bit of the monastic in your own heart is that which is seeking transcendence, or just seeking end of suffering, put it more simply. And to associate with people like that is very, very important. So what is it about monasticism that is particularly helpful? And I think it would be non-distraction, that the number of concerns that we deal with, and it's sort of a complicated life. It's not so complicated. But just the number of distractions that exist in the world now make mindfulness, calmness, stillness, make it very, very difficult. So in whatever way your own life can be contoured or directed towards more simplicity is going to be very, very helpful. If you have young children, well, that's not going to be simple. That's going to be complex, and that is your giving. You give to your children and care for your children. And that's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. But there come times in your life where you can make choices sometimes. You can go right or left. And so the consideration you might give yourself is, okay, where do I want to be in 5 years' time? Not in terms of how much money do I want to be earning from the work I'm doing, not a kind of career projection, but where do I want to be in lifestyle in 5 years' time, and what might be possible, and what is kind of maybe missing in my lifestyle now that I'd like to enhance my lifestyle towards Dharma. And most people, I think that reflection brings them to the idea, well, I'd like more space and more time, maybe perhaps more time to do retreats or just to chill out a bit at home. So if you have, sometimes people don't have options, just get on with it. But if you have those kind of life choices coming up, then really consider, what will this next thing that I'm going to take on, how's that going to affect my spiritual life? Having said that, picking up generous activity doesn't involve a lot of effort. So making this retreat requires a lot of effort. But if it's done for the sake of practicing understanding your mind, then it becomes a vehicle for generosity. So let's say for me, building monasteries is a kind of complex thing to be undertaking. But that activity is very rewarding because the complexity challenges us, and it gives us an opportunity to create something for the larger society. Now, you could say, well, if you want a really simple life, why don't you just go live in a cave or live under a rock? Well, personally, I need a bit more kalyanamitta. I need a bit more stimulation. So what's the happy way? Well, I guess there's no real answer to it. But if life is just becoming a kind of driven experience where one has no time to reflect and to pause and to be aware and to notice the heart's afflictions and to understand how the Four Noble Truths work, then of course life becomes a kind of spiritual burnout, because one isn't really addressing those things in the heart. So I would say, like, if you have a complex situation in your social life, do you have the space to use that for edification, for your own enlightenment, or does the complexity just overwhelm you? That's the kind of test I've had in my own monastic life. So I've had situations where there have been conflicts in the Sangha and difficulties, as any group would have. And I've used them to understand myself and be a better person. But I've also had situations in monastic life where I got overwhelmed. The complexity of the interpersonal relations and the amount of information I had to handle emotionally and so on, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't be mindful. So I had to get out of those situations. So the key thing is the capacity to witness the way things are. So formal practice, these retreats that we do and the situations where we develop some sitting meditation or quiet meditation in our own lives should be enhancing this witnessing attitude, this attitude of awakening, rather than just being some kind of pleasant experience. that has no relationship to worldly dharmas, that can't be right. I can't see that. If meditation is just some kind of disassociation with normal life, is that really going to be what you want? Wouldn't it make more sense that the practice feeds your capacity to understand yourself in the complexities of social life? Obviously, it must be that. So it's not just, meditation isn't just kind of tranquilizing the mind and having a bit of a break from the hurly-burly. It's actually enhancing something very, very powerful, witnessing, awareness, compassion, these kinds of things. And then when you go into the world, that really informs the worldly dharmas. Your strengths are then, they come to the fore in the conflicts you face, in the physical sickness you and your family face, in the confusions that society has. You become much more able then to use that for liberation. And liberation is quite often, you do need friction, don't you? Like, you need something to work with. And so although we sometimes wish that we didn't have friction, that everyone was very nice to us all the time, that's not real life. And then the very friction is that which awakens you. And what does it awaken you to? It says, well, there is suffering. Definitely, this is suffering. And the language of the First Noble Truth, which we repeat again and again and again, is there is suffering rather than I am suffering. And what does that point to? That points to the witnessing of suffering as an object rather than the attachment to suffering as a subject. You get that? You know what I mean? So someone, I'm having some conflict in family or work, and I feel the conflict, certainly. And then the First Noble Truth, there is suffering. That creates the witnessing posture. Oh, suffering is like this. And then that's non-attachment. From that, you can then work towards the understanding of suffering, as opposed to, oh, that idiot, or I shouldn't be angry, or that's all self-view. That's not, there is suffering. That is, I am suffering and it's not fair. So that might not seem like much, but it is essential really to understanding the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering and it feels this way, as opposed to I shouldn't be this way, or they shouldn't be this way, or distraction and getting away from it. So you're making conscious the very thing which you don't want. And that's the absolute genius of this teaching, is that it uses human discontent to take you beyond discontent. Consumerism uses human discontent to make you consume. You feel bored, then you get something to fulfill your boredom. A movie or a new telephone or a new frock or whatever you have, right? And that's the use of discontent. And I mean, you kind of need it, otherwise none of us will be employed probably. So, but realize that the Buddha is going right against that. Rather than just following your desires to get rid of discontent, he says, no, understand discontent. Any form of discomfort, discontent, or complaining, make it conscious. This is suffering. It's an optimistic teaching. He doesn't say that there is only the First Noble Truth. So that's one of the misunderstandings that you have around the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. Is people say, well, Buddhism says that everything is suffering. No. I mean, if everything was suffering, I wouldn't do Buddhism. There is liberation from suffering, right? So if someone lays that trip on you from another tradition, says, yeah, Buddhism is really, really pessimistic, says everything is suffering. That's not true. No. There is suffering. It's a personal reflection on some kind of misunderstanding I have. I don't understand. That's what the Buddha is pointing to, the lack of wisdom or the lack of understanding, avijja. So from that awakening, then, of course, you apply the Four Noble Truths and say, okay, what is it? What do I want that I don't have? What do I have that I don't want? They're very simple. And that means you give up distraction, which is the running away from discontent. So distraction is like, eating lots of ice cream when you feel depressed, or just absorbing into whatever you want. Well, now you're kind of very mature and saying, you're not blaming anyone, not blaming yourself. You're saying, well, what's the cause? There is this discontent. And that's the contemplative mind. Now, that mind of analysis isn't ego analysis. It's using thought to apply attention to the problem. So it's right thinking. You're not just kind of analyzing all the time. You're actually looking, okay, as you feel discontent, what is it now? What do I want? What's the wanting? And then you wait. You observe, you wait, you allow things to become conscious. So the way I was teaching meditation, let sound become, let sound come into consciousness, right? I was teaching that way. Or the body, I was saying, let the feelings in your mouth become conscious. So using that language specifically, because then you apply that to dukkha, to the discontent you're feeling. Let the discontent become conscious. So you're not just trying to fix it or attack it with some preconceived notion of who you should and shouldn't be. You're actually making conscious the feeling of discontent. That takes patience. What is it? And from that, you'll see the desire to have or not have. That's where the insight comes. So as I always say, that was my problem with fear, is I didn't know how to make fear fully conscious. I kept reacting to it with a desire to get rid of it. And I worked and worked and worked, and I said, oh yeah, okay, this is discontent, feels this way. And then I could see the desire to get rid of it. So there is suffering, there is a cause, and there's an end. There is an end. It's a very optimistic teaching. We human beings are not total losers. Although world news seems to indicate that we have a possibility to be really, really free and also be giving, not just run away from life. And that's the secret. It's the secret around the discontent we feel and then the desire not to have them. So it's an education, really. It's an education rather than, as I was saying earlier in this retreat, I said, there is a lot of language about attainment, getting this and getting that, and this level and who's got that level, which is kind of like saying, like when you talk about that kind of language, it's what we call spiritual materialism. So it might as well be who's got a Tesla and who's got a BMW, right? That's the kind of language you get around it. But there's also the language of letting go and ceasing and letting things end. And that's something you can know. You can't, like these different attainment kind of language, you can't know that because you can't, unless you think you have it. But then you start to seek it and then you're caught in craving again. But when you look at it like discontent, you have that, right? You don't have to invent it. And no one has to persuade you that you have it. It's there. It's something that's obviously there. So that's the genius of the teaching. It takes that. But then you have to have enough skill to patiently let it come into consciousness. What's it like? What's this feel like? And all the language that I'm trying to encourage in this retreat is the language of awakening. And then if you're patient, you'll see, okay, there's the cause. I don't want life to be this way, or I want life to be another way. And as you see the cause, you then sustain awareness on unfulfilled desire. Now that's hard to do as well, because we want our desires. But when you can sustain awareness and unfulfilled desire, as long as it's not a biological desire that hurts you, right? You're just aware of it, you're aware of it. Then you see the cessation of desire. And so you see a freedom of the heart, which is with the way things are, with that discontent, rather than seeking some distraction or blaming anyone. And then that silencing of the mind becomes very interesting, very attractive, much more attractive than the distractions of sense experience and consumerism. So, like, I don't teach in a progressive way. So, for the folk that were on this retreat who are beginners, my apologies if I totally confused you. So, I always suggest that people do study the Four Noble Truths more formally, because I just allude to them all the time. So, if you haven't got that language in place, do study that language, because I don't think I could do a beginner's retreat. I kind of more interested in what I'm interested in. So again, my apologies if it was kind of confusing. So there is a place for systematic study, and I just don't have the kind of gifts for that. But do that, and then this language will make much more sense to you, what we're talking about. So I guess that sort of covers some of the ideas. When we take the 5 precepts, that's the sort of rough moral guidelines of our lives. And the 5 precepts are for reflection. They're not absolutes. So the precept on not harming, not killing sentient beings, on not lying and not stealing, on sexual fidelity, on right speech, and so on. Those are for reflection. They're kind of helpful mirrors to the way you're functioning. And probably the most difficult for many people is right speech, because usually we're a pretty moral lot. But right speech is a huge challenge. So you might just go through the texts on right speech. They're very good. And there's different lists that we have about what right speech implies. And then this is the way you use formal study for deepening your reflective capacity, is you take something like the recommendations on right speech, go to the texts, find the lists, and speech which is in concord, speech which is beautiful, speech which is not coarse, and speech which is truthful. And you read that over 100 times. Because you read it once, and sure, I mean, it makes sense. It's not rocket science. It makes a lot of sense. But actually, what you want to do is to get that language into your own citta, into your own heart. So it's the language of reflection which comes out when you are speaking. So if you take like the language of concord, speech which is in concord and harmonious, and you say that to yourself a lot, and then you find yourself putting someone else down and creating division in society. You say, well, wait, that's not concord. Because quite often we don't even notice these habits of speech. They're so quick and so whatever. And then the language of reflection wakes you up to that. So maybe your nature is to always complain in the family that, that the toast wasn't cooked correctly, or that the butter's too hard, something really significant like that. And then, but that just becomes a habit, right? Oh, toast is too hard again. What kind of a family is this? Or and yet that can just become like kind of a heedless habit. So then you take on some of the teaching and you repeat in your heart, you write it out, you memorize it, you really get it into your citta, what the Buddha recommended about right speech. And then as you're speaking, if the speech is going off the rails, you become more awake of your own inner workings. You become aware of your intention, you become aware of the habits of moods and how you react to those moods. Your witnessing posture becomes much stronger. You're more aware. And then you get less invested in self-view, less invested in ego manifestations, less suffering, more mindfulness. So we have in Theravada Buddhism many very good lists. We have the list of the paramitas, and then the lists on various aspects of sila and human relationships. So taking something like that as a kind of project for a year or so and just working with it is very rewarding, because it's nurturing the truth which you believe in. We all have a sense of truth. We all have a sense of aspiration of what's important in our lives. And if we don't pay attention to that, we don't really feel good about ourselves. But if we pay attention to that, even though we're not perfect, but we keep to that aspiration, that gives us a sense of self-confidence. There is less self-doubt. There's less self-criticism because we are, we're following the path. We're doing the best we can. So I thank you all for your attention and giving me this chance to share Dhamma with you. Our community was here as well. We had a jolly good time, I think. Jolly good Christmas time. And then we got to wish William a happy birthday. So it's all good. Okay, William, I'll finish there.